Okay. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Exciting to have Jen Hague, who is the co-champion for the community of practice, and I think we'll have her face showing up shortly too. But so Jen will help manage the online discussions, and I'll be kind of here in the room. So we'll try something a little bit different this time. We'll have a section of the meeting where we'll split into the online and the in-person group and have the discussions separately, and then we'll bring everybody together so that we give enough time for our online friends to have their voices heard too. So what we have today is, I hope we did a little bit of the welcoming online already, and we had a little bit of networking here in the room. But before we start, I would say let's just quickly go around the room and introduce yourself with your name and organization. Shall we start with?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kyle Dietrich. I work with Equal Access for their Africa team.
Hi, my name is Lourdes. I come from America Solidaria, US.
Hi, my name is Jacinta Zebedee. I come from SSG Advisors.
Hi, I'm Shanita Pham. I'm with World Learning.
Good morning, everyone. This is Salim Hilali, and I come from Creative Associates.
Good morning. My name is Ignacio. I came from YABT.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm with the National Democratic Institute.
And Emma, I'm with Texas Consulting Group.
And Selenas with FHI 360. I manage at Peace Building Practice.
Morning, everybody. I'm Valerie Lorena with the Young Americans Business Trust. We are a subcontractor of this task order. We have been supporting the COP as facilitators and other roles in the community. So thank you for joining us today.
And I'm Maria Bringelmeyer. So for those on screen, I'm the one in the bright red jacket.
And I'm Lindsay Wolf. I'm the YouthPower Learning Project Manager here at Making Sense International, and I'll be helping manage the online component of today's meeting.
Then Jen.
Hey everybody, good to see you everybody. And Maria, thanks for that heads up. It is hard to tell who's in the room, so if I could ask, probably on behalf of everybody here, if you could introduce yourself if you're going to talk, that would be really helpful.
Yeah. And then we have a whole group of people. Do you want to just mention who we have online, or?
Sure, that sounds good. So I'm just looking through the participants in the chat. We've got Liz Mullen from Equal Access, Ali Hamid from Peace Without Borders from Pakistan. Trying to scroll and it's not letting me scroll. Okay. Sylvie from Search for Common Ground, calling from the Netherlands. We have, trying to see, sorry, somebody from Palestine. Tara from Mercy Corps. Mike from VSO International. Lena from Africa Works Institute. I think that's about all. I'm having a
Yeah.
time sorry, guys.
All right, thank you. Well, welcome everybody. So for those of you who are new to YouthPower Learning, just a few words about YouthPower Learning. It's a USAID funded program that is focused on advancing solutions to improve young life, and with a particular focus on positive youth development. So that whole concept of seeing youth as an asset as opposed to a problem is kind of underlying all of the activities. And so the definition that we are using for positive youth development is that we recognize that youth has assets. We make sure that youth can use those assets, so therefore has the agency, has the ability to contribute to positive change, and is surrounded by an enabling environment. So it's assets, agency, contribution, and the enabling environment. And that applies especially also to all of our activities that have to do with youth and peace building and youth in peace and security, which is actually an area where youth very often has been seen more as the problem, perhaps more so than in other sectors or other areas. And so we feel that it's really important to have that mindset of the PYD behind all the activities. And so we have obviously a website, and then the communities of practice, of which we have 4, are a big component of our activities. And the Youth in Peace and Securities is obviously the one that you're here for. And then we have one on youth engagement, we have one on gender and PYD, and we have one on cross-sectoral skills. So any of those are interesting for you and you're not yet a member there, please feel free to also join. So just kind of that as background. We have quite a full agenda. We'll start with a network, a brainstorming activity and prioritization activity regarding the topics. So for those of you who are online, I hope you have received in your email the list of the topics that were proposed by the community members. And for those of you here, we have a printout. So those are topics that our members have suggested. Jen had sent out a request, and so we will talk about those. And then we'll provide just a brief COP update, and I'll ask Jen to just talk about what we've done kind of since September, and then we'll jump into that breakout session. For the online group, we'll do that breakout session by using the chat room. And Lindsay has offered to help with managing the chat room. We'll have a whiteboard, and she'll explain that when we get to that section. And then we are super excited to have Kyle here from Equal Access. And the excitement is not just because of his presentation, but we're also announcing that they are one of the grantees for the 4 grants that we have awarded. We haven't yet made any big announcements because USAID is still going through some approval process with the missions. And so we've been kind of quiet about it. But we felt that we couldn't really pass off this opportunity to at least make this announcement. And then Kyle will talk more about it. And thank you all who have participated in the process of selecting grantees, evaluating grantees, or writing proposals. We've had a really difficult time selecting and narrowing it down to 4. We had 113 applications that were really good applications. So we're very excited, and we look forward to hearing more from Kyle about the project when he's giving his presentation. So with that, Jen, do you want to talk a little bit about our activities kind of over the last few months?
Sure. I think Maria, you covered the big majority of it, which was the grant process. I just want to be clear actually with everybody that the COP really is meant to be, run by the community and, useful to the community. My and Maria's level of effort on this is really only about a day and a quarter a month at this point. And so that a lot of that time was really taken up by trying to figure out who the grant winners would be, because we had so many good grants. And you'll see that when we have the good applications. When we have a conversation about topics for the next year, I think we come into this year with tons of great potential presentations, and we hope that the COP can be a platform for all of the groups and the great work that you're doing, even if we weren't able to financially support you. And really, my role and Maria's role, as we see it, is to facilitate conversation and to help everybody kind of learn from each other versus being kind of a top-down pushing out of information. So that's kind of what we really wanted to focus on in this meeting. And we really appreciate the emails that have come in so far.
And then I hope all of you in here have been able to pick up a copy of the brief that was developed in September. And so for those of you online, we'll make sure to include the link on the website to the brief, which I think is going to be a useful start. I think it's going to be a living document, hopefully, where we can update new resources as they become available. And we were also very excited to have hosted and co-hosted some webinars in the fall with Peace Exchange. And I mentioned earlier in the room here that we're also always happy to either co-host webinars and also obviously invite all of you to present at some of the webinars. And we have now about 320 members in the community of practice. So one of the main activities during the breakout session is to also think about how do you all want to leverage the community of practice and how do you want to contribute to the community of practice. So with that, actually, let's jump right into the activity for the breakout sessions. We have these questions that were submitted by all of you and others that are not on the webinar, and that's a starting point. So the objective of this breakout session is what topics should the COP focus on this year, and then also how do you want to contribute to those topics. I would suggest that we select like 3 topics that we prioritize in this group, and then perhaps 3 priorities online. So have a discussion first about are there any other topics that are missing from the list, and then have a discussion about what do we want to prioritize, because obviously it's there's only so many hours. It is a community of practice, as Jen said. It's not a big research project with a lot of funding behind it. So what's realistic for a community of practice to tackle? So that's kind of what we want to use this time for. So with that, we'll let Jen take over the online discussion. And then, and I said that, and the second question is also the format of the interaction. What kind of interactions do we want to have? Is it primarily, webinars? Are there other ways in which the community of practice wants to interact more? We have used primarily webinars and in-person meetings and then just email exchange so far. Is that what works for everybody, or is there anything else that you would like to do more of or less of? So that's the task for the next, what did we say, until 10:05, so about 20 minutes, and then we'll reconvene and we'll have a readout from our online members and feedback from this group. Since we are we have grown a little bit. We have a separate breakout room. We have the option to break into two groups here, or do we want to stay together? Leave that up to you. Yep. Okay. So, so it's right. I will show you where it is. So I don't know. Should we have? Yeah, half and half.
How many people can be there?
6. Yeah. So we'll, does the group in the back want to go into the other room? And we'll ask you to appoint a spokesperson that will report back. We have a flip chart there, and so let's kind of have it here. So Geneva and from here on this group, and I'll walk with you.
I think that's more than 6, right?
Yeah.
Actually, let me leave, perhaps Louise, if you want to stay here, and then we'll have one, or actually Ignacio, if you want to stay here, and then Louise goes with the other group. Since you're from the same organization like that. Okay. Let's go. Thank you. You can leave your organization.
Bien, ¿y tú? No te había visto hace rato.
Sí, me fui a México.
Yo también.
No lo pedí, no lo pedí.
Okay, so I think we have made it so everybody should be able to hear me if you're online, but I should be muted in the room for the people in DC. Could you let me know if you can hear me if you're online? And what we're going to really do is have a chat-based conversation, unless any of you guys are able to use your audio, in which case you're welcome to just speak up as well. Okay, great. So I see people saying that they can hear me. What we have going on hopefully in the bottom right corner of your screen, you should be able to see the notes section, and that has topics proposed by the COP members so far. And if you scroll down in that same box, you should be able to see at the bottom potential formats of interaction proposed by members. Now, all of that came from an email that I sent out, I don't know, December probably, asking what y'all were interested in. And so that's just literally a cut and paste from the conversation that we had through internet or through the email earlier. Some people replied all, and some people just replied to me. So you probably all haven't seen this entire list, but these are all the answers that we got. And I'm happy to go through those really quickly. We also have this whiteboard where Lindsay, our magical, lovely COP person in DC, is going to be writing down some of the ideas that we're coming up with here in the room. And then our goal at the end of this conversation is to come up with our top 3, 2 or 3, to present back to the main kind of plenary. So hopefully that'll make sense to people. I'm going to go through and just start with the topics proposed by the COP members so far in that notes section. So one thing that came up was research and learning for youth, particularly girls, in isolated and post-conflict areas. And this was a person actually writing in from Pakistan, so said like some of the Afghanistan-Pakistan border areas in Pakistan. And then trauma-informed conflict transformation, which was the subject of our last webinar. Well, it wasn't ours, but one that we co-hosted, what was really good. Webinars with the 4 YouthPower Learning grantees. So, it would be great to be able to introduce all of them. Again, like Maria said, once we get the formal mission approval and could be super public about it, we could advertise it as webinars with the grantees, focusing on civic engagement and peace building, CVE, PVE, discussing draft or final research findings as appropriate, obviously depending where they are in their work plans. Collecting brief information from the grant proposals that did not get selected. So basically what that one is saying, that was from Maria and me. We had so many excellent grant options, and we ended up with a short list that was a pretty long short list. And we just thought, if there's any way that we can provide support that isn't financial through the COP, and if that's providing a platform here for groups who had excellent proposals but weren't selected for grants to be able to, present what they're doing and just get more of an audience, that might be an idea. And then we could do like a focus on the field, so new assessment tools, newly piloted models, new ideas, sharing knowledge regarding new opportunities. So basically trying to move our community outside of just DC. And there's a lot of you obviously in DC, but we want this to be truly global. Use of technology and ICT with youth and peace building. Protection of youth and participatory action research in conflict situations, gang-controlled regions, or otherwise dangerous locations. Developing skills for youth in challenging environments. Interdependencies between conflict and climate change. Responsibilities and responsiveness of youth towards the environment and climate change. So it's a super long list. I hope that y'all heard me go through all of that. And that's the first part of our conversation. I want to keep in mind the second part here, which is at the bottom of this notes. One of the things that came up when I asked a question about what topics would you like is people wrote back and said, well, really it's about how we should be using this and how we should be interacting as a COP. And so the questions are kind of interlinked for me because when we're talking about, if we want to do presentations by each of the shortlisted grantees or anybody who wants to volunteer to do a presentation to the COP, does that mean we want to have a webinar every month? Does it mean we want to have something like this first topic, which is a monthly discussion focusing on one particular project to show more in-depth and multi-approach sharing through several means, such as virtual conference, webinar, sharing documents. So the way we interpreted that idea was maybe a group would want to volunteer for a month to kind of say, okay, we're going to have a webinar at the beginning of the month and talk about a project we're doing, and then we'll facilitate conversation throughout the month and push docs to the COP. Just kind of an idea of having, a different group kind of adopt the COP for a month and really decide on what the topics would be. And then Maria and I would be here to support that completely. So that's one idea. Another idea that came up in terms of formats of interaction was meet to collectively think about one of the major challenges facing the industry and think of ways to collaboratively address it. So I think that's talking about having more actual meetings like this and more in-person and online meetings. Another thing that came up, which isn't on this list, was just having more networking opportunities in general. And so that's actually why we started this meeting with 15 minutes of networking at the beginning for people in DC and the ability for all of us to chat online. So we really do, again, want to make sure that this is a useful COP for everybody involved. Our budget is really, really tight. Our travel budget has been cut, which is why I'm calling in. But I think that's a great, chance for us to really maximize this online component because I'll be calling in and I'm one of the co-champions. So the online part is where I'm really engaging as well. So with all of that long bit in mind, I would love to just kind of hear from y'all in the chat box, or if somebody magically is able to connect to audio, which would be beyond my technical capabilities, please feel free to start writing down some ideas or let us know what you think are your favorite out of these, the topics proposed so far, or anything that it inspired for you. We're looking forward to hearing your thoughts, and then Lindsay's going to throw up kind of the main points from our conversation onto the whiteboard. So this next bit should be mostly silent kind of chat interaction. So I see Lydia's comment asking to explain what we mean by trauma-informed conflict transformation. I am by no means an expert, but it is something I'm interested in learning about, so I can say a little bit while people are typing. The idea here is that, when communities go through conflict situations, they face trauma, emotional distress, and the sort of disturbance that can then create further conflict or instability or reasons for youth, for example, to want to join a violent group because they're feeling like they need something based on the trauma that they faced in the past. They need some kind of sense of identity and security, and so we see that trauma really plays a role in keeping conflict going and also in making conflict recur. And so trauma-informed conflict transformation would really think about coping skills internally. There are projects ranging from kind of mindfulness to helping people with anger management, having groups for emotional support. We had a presentation that we promoted here on the COP, but it wasn't our presentation, in December from the Green String Network, who's doing this kind of work in Kenya and Somalia. And what they're showing is that what they said in their presentation is that really trauma is kind of at the root. And if you're not helping people deal with their emotions and feelings, trauma is is kind of inevitably going to come back. And so the way this trauma-informed kind of theory of change works is that you have to get at that emotional side first, or in addition to more traditional kind of peace-building interpersonal approaches. So let me read some of the rest of these. VSO is new to the COP, so we're most interested in webinars that share learning from the grantees. That's great, the YouthPower grantees. VSO is currently revising our global youth strategy, considering work in fragile settings as part of our broader resilience work, tools and approaches in this sector. And I see that Lindsay's already writing a lot of these down. Conflict-sensitive participatory action research toolkit or guidance would be extremely useful. That's from Liz. And would like to contribute to developing guidance. Okay, so Liz, that's great. I think that would be a really good idea. And this kind of plays into the conversation I'd like to have about the way that we interact here. So do we want to, as a group, come up with, documents together? Do we want to come up with sets of guidance? Would it be better for the people in the COP to have, not to put you on the spot, Liz, but maybe to have your organization provide a webinar so people can just hear about what's already being done? So the big question is, how do we want to engage with some of these ideas? Okay, developing skills for youth in challenging environments is important. Great. Tools. I'm familiar with Middle East with youth and looking for contextualized, validated tools to measure change in trauma with youth. Tara, at the end of this, actually, I can send out to the COP the link to the trauma-informed conflict transformation presentation that happened back in December, because they did actually have their M&E specialist talking about how they measured stuff. It was just really the start of the conversation, and I think that's where we're at. Is, I personally haven't seen anything that is validated as a tool and replicated out there, but I'm like pulling in as many examples as we can so that we can adapt them for our own context. I think that's exactly where we should be as a COP. Greatest interest, ICT. Sorry, I'm like going back and reading people's stuff. Rebecca said using ICT to empower marginalized youth, gender assessments, good point. Participatory action research. Nancy mentioned ICT, effective approaches to youth positive engagement on social media. Mike said a chance to network, absolutely, and foster program collaboration, absolutely. I want to be able to do that as much as we can. And I think if you guys have ideas on ways to network that aren't kind of the before and after times of these particular meetings, that would be super welcome, especially for the people who are joining online from all over the world. I'm really new. I'm Googling like online networking and trying to figure out what that means and what it looks like. Welcome your ideas. Liz said, I think it could be interesting to have a webinar. So you're right, EAI isn't the only group doing participatory action research. We did actually, for the last in-person meeting of the COP that I actually attended, which was in the fall, we had Search for Common Ground talking about the research that they had done in, I want to say Liberia, somewhere in West Africa, and they were talking about how there's a big risk for secondary trauma. So if you're doing research with youth and the youth are out asking questions to communities about the sort of conflict that they faced, there's a big chance that the youth themselves have faced those sorts of conflict and might be re-traumatized by hearing the stories. I found that to be, a whole set of considerations that we should really be thinking more about, and would be happy to, expand on that conversation. To catch up and scroll, and Lindsay's doing a much better job than me writing down all of these topics. Okay, we could follow up with producing guidance papers. BBC Media Action, new to the COP, welcome, Alistair. Learning how to measure and evaluate impact on projects under the CVE banner. Ugh, that has been my life for the last almost 10 years. Happy to talk about that as a group. Okay. Alejandra saying, I would add to the bullet point from the field, new and creative identification and program recruitment, targeting strategies to reach those youth that are most vulnerable to conflict. Totally. That's a topic that also comes under the CVE umbrella as something that we are focused on. So I think we could get a lot of good conversation going from different people focused on different type of youth challenges and resiliencies. Learning more about platforms that enable youth to utilize their skills to become productive citizens. Manuals of how to engage youth in challenging environments. That's the aim of SYFS, to increase youth participation. Also need to ensure they're not harmed. Absolutely. I think I have finally made it to the bottom of what is currently in the chat box. And wow, that is showing 14, I think that's 15 and 16, or maybe, Lindsay, those are kind of connected. Yeah, but okay, we've got a lot going on our whiteboard up there. So I'm going to ask you, so Mike mentioned working with disabled youth in conflict environments. I think, and Lydia above that talked about young women. There's actually something I'm working on right now that talks about inclusiveness in programming. So we could add to that list, right? We could say disability, ethnically or religiously or tribally marginalized or geographically marginalized. In some contexts, LGBTQI sort of populations. There's a lot of different kind of cross-cutting sort of points of vulnerability for youth. And so maybe something that would be a little bit umbrella to talk about in disability, gender, all these different intersectionalities. That might be useful. So we've got a very long list going on already here. Lindsay, until what time do we have? Sorry to put you on the spot. Is it 10:15? Oh, we have a minute. Okay, so we would like to put up a poll and have people vote for, let's just stick with the 16 things that we have up on the whiteboard right now. And we want everybody to vote for their top 2 or 3. And so Lindsay is going to put up a little poll box, and it'll have places where you can put a checkbox. You could put a checkbox in all of them. We really, really would prefer you just to put it in your top 2 or 3, and we'll come back to the group. I mean, we'll be able to share this whole list with the whole group in plenary, but this will enable us to come back and say, okay, these are our top 2 or 3. And you can see here there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, going down to 15 on the bottom. And then on the side, we have 16, working with disabled youth in conflict environments, 17, how to cope in prolonged conflict. And I think we just have those 17. So please pick your top 2 to 3, and we'll just give you a minute to do that. Okay, so we only have a couple of people, it looks like, who have voted so far. So please go ahead and get your votes in. Hopefully you can hear me. You're going to have to, unfortunately, re-vote because we shifted the format so that you could pick more than one. So if you voted for the multiple choice where you only were able to select one, you're going to have to come back and vote again so you can click 2 or 3 of these boxes, please. Tara, I think you're right that some of these can be grouped. I think at this point, just based on the format, what we wanted to see is where most interest is, and then we can go back. So this isn't a final answer sort of situation. It's just kind of based on our conversation. What do we want to go back to the main group and talk about? So far, we only have, our max here is a couple things with 2 votes. Again, please get your votes in if you can. I see still 14 people online, so I hope more of you can vote. So as you're hopefully continuing to vote, Lindsay's saying she's going to have to make a new poll. Okay, let's just have a conversation on what I'm seeing It looked like tools and approaches in the sector, number 2, was something that had come up, and then we get more specific when we talk about particular tools. I'm not remembering exactly what was on there, but how to measure and evaluate impact on CVE. I saw that there were a few votes for that, number 12. Sorry about this, the fact that it's not tabulating, and it looks like we're going to try one more time. Okay, looks like y'all are voting again, Lindsay, or like are those votes being added in? Should people revote, I guess is my question. Okay, yes, please do revote. Thank you. There we go. Here's some numbers. Okay, some of the things I see leading right now, 12 is leading, 8. So if you don't want 8 or 12 to be our answers to report back to the group, get in there and vote. 8 was gender assessments, and 12 is how to measure and evaluate impact on CVE projects. And while you're all waiting for the voting to happen, I would welcome some conversation in the chat about, what we mentioned at the beginning here. What are the methods or forms of interaction you would like? So do you like the idea of having a group kind of adopt the COP for a month? Does that seem like too much work? For those of you who are getting COP emails, does that seem like too many emails? We are on the hook contractually for 2 webinars for the year, which is not a lot. We can do as many as we want to do, as many as we have the LOE for, and so it really depends on how much partnership we get from people in the COP. I'd be really interested to hear other ideas you have for how you would want to interact as a group. I'm not sure when they're going to pull us back into plenary, but it does look like there's a bit of center of gravity around 8 and 12 still, which are gender assessments and M&E for CVE. 2 things I'm super interested in myself, so happy to work with groups, trying to think of what would make, what would help the group in order to do that. Would you want, when it comes to gender assessments, would you want groups who have done really useful gender assessments to make presentations to the group? Would you want online conversations, just kind of threads on the COP? How would you want to see these kind of things coming to life, I guess is the question that we can address until we go back into plenary. It looks like we're heading back into plenary, but please keep typing. And I did mean to mention, on the YouthPower site, we do have a document kind of repository, so there's already stuff there.
Give us the feedback from the group. So Jen, the floor is yours. Yeah.
Great. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So we had thank you, Lindsay, for really typing quickly and making up polls quickly. We had a long list of actually 17 ideas that came up, and then we had a quick poll to pick our top 2 or 3. And the 2 things that rose to the top were gender assessments and how to evaluate and measure impact on CVE projects. So we have a whole other long list that we're happy to share, but those were the 2 things where we had the most votes at the end of the day. And then we talked a little bit at the end about how we want to talk about gender assessments and how we want to talk about measuring impact on CVE projects. And people talked about an online tool or report sharing platform. What I was just mentioning to the COP is that we have on youthpower.org, there's an online repository for documents, and we can send out that link where people can actually add their own documents as long as you're registered, which is free. On youthpower.org, you can continue to add your own docs there, and you can search for new docs. But that's something that we can, thank you, Tara, for putting that out to everybody, youthpower.org/resources. And, that's something that we can send in email conversations to remind people to go back there. Christina, thank you. So Making Sense International are the hosts for Youth Power Learning, and Christina is their communications manager, so she can help us as well. And the conversation was about, should we have monthly webinars? Should we have groups adopt the COP for a month and push out conversations and resources? How should we collaborate? And that's where I don't think we really got to a consensus, but we're just starting to talk about that. There was a bit of conversation about how to get the geographic profile of members kind of more visible and more global, trying to represent all regions in the COP. And I think that's something we're super open to.
Great, thank you, Jen, and thank you to the whole group. And by the way, we are recording the webinar, so we will make the webinar recording available to everybody, so you can also look at the chat, and we will copy the chat into a separate document so that we can send that out to everybody too, so that you can see the different ideas that came up. So shall we start or continue with the group that was in the other room? Oh yeah, we can put the chart over there.
I think so. No, you do it.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, some of the topics that we talked about in the other room were links between positive youth development and youth resilience, an increase in monitoring, evaluation, and building the evidence base. And from that, we also talked about improving the dissemination and access to information, which I think is similar to what the other group discussed as well. How do we best get the information out to the community of practice about what we're working on, sharing what works and what doesn't, and then also encouraging innovation. We also included one of the topics that was shared on the paper, including the civic education and peace building. And then we also kind of had a conversation about tools for like building relationships and increasing communication with different authority forces or security forces, and how to further contribute to an enabling environment. Okay, that was it. I don't know if anybody from the group would like to add something.
Just to complement in terms of the monitoring and evaluation, something that we were discussing is that many of the COP members have some projects ongoing in the region, around the world, and there is still not clear evidence on if they're working or not. They still don't have the final indicators, and something that we suggest is actually to use the tools that we develop here at the Youth Power, at least as a matter of A, validation, and B, start using some tools that we actually build as part of the project in real projects and see how that goes. The second component was in terms of the ways of communication, to have it clear if when we talk about communication, we're talking about communication with a beneficiary, which is basically young people, or we're talking, like sometimes we do, beneficiaries communication with the donors. And the tools and ways are different, and if we are trying to share all these amazing resources we have to be used by youth, we need to speak youth. So something that we really need to do is actually, instead of being as the innovators on defining what tools to use, is actually as a youth What are the tools they are using? How can we engage with you? What is easy for you instead of complicating their life a little more? So that's a little more just to complement what we discussed.
We also started our conversation about what platforms are most useful, but that was kind of where our group broke up. So I don't know if anybody wants to add about what platforms were most useful or what they utilize. I really liked the webinars on the Peace Exchange. They were helpful for me personally.
I guess one thing someone mentioned was that a lot of this already exists out there in different platforms. Instead of just knowing what's out there and to get to it, it's sort of aggregating.
Yeah, I would just add, we also talked about the importance of sort of sharing what doesn't work as well as what does work, so sort of learning from our mistakes, and that there's a tendency, if we're encouraging innovation, we also have to encourage the fact that not every project that we're going to put out is going to be as successful as we want it to be, and being willing to sort of go on that journey and discover, you know, what elements of this project were successful and which ones aren't, and then in terms of speaking youth, you know, do we want to also engage with social media? I think that there are these sort of nascent platforms that, when we're talking about the digital divide, aren't necessarily always being taken into account. So figuring out what those channels of communication are that the youth are also engaging in, and you know, youth even using Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, things like that to reach people in a way that sort of these platforms may not be quite as accessible, but there's always sort of a roundabout route to get to these social media platforms as well.
Yeah, and one of the last things to add was one of the words that we defined that was kind of relevant is access. Access at all levels is an issue for us that we need to improve, and the possibility is something that, since we have access to so many innovative proposals thanks to the grants and the contract, and we have access also to so many information on what works and doesn't work, it will be ideal for us to contribute to the GACs, not only as a matter of provide funding, but actually provide knowledge on how they can improve those proposals based on previous similar experiences applied in different regions to similar issues. So I think that was it. 2 minutes to discuss, so we didn't talk too much.
So shall we go to?
I did want to bring up another, sorry guys, just I want to kind of jump in for the online group. We did have those two topics as the most popular, but some things that came up that are related to what y'all said. One thing was about inclusion of youth with disabilities, and kind of just thinking through all the different points where youth are not a homogenous group and they are going to have different ways to act.
Great. So who from our group wants to present? I was the scribe. I'm happy to start if you want. So we came up with a range of different topics that the group was interested in, from private sector engagement and workforce development, CVPD, and entrepreneurship to, let me just read the list and then talk about which one got the top votes. Security on the internet, including kind of cyberspace discussion, use of technology, which included, you know, skill building and soft skills, and there were also some other examples that were mentioned. Trauma-informed peace-building programs using yoga, meditation, post-conflict programs or activities that involve gender and gender-based violence. Some examples with girls in Mexico and making them aware of different opportunities, since they grew up in an environment where there were perhaps not that many opportunities. Comparative learning across regions for CVPV and another project had done something similar. Reintegration of youth and decreasing stigma, especially child soldiers, deported youth, which is now becoming kind of more of an issue. And we had intergenerational dialogue and then participation in policies by youth. So does somebody want to pick up the ones that we picked?
There wasn't really consensus, but I think,
Yeah.
you know, in addition to the ones that were listed on the topics, we said, yeah, that the idea of the issue of reintegration, and I would add rehabilitation, from a different region perspective. A lot of regions dealing with this, a lot of conflicts at points where we don't have the answers about how to prepare societies or to receive victims or those that are quote unquote the problem, whether the radicalized youth or ex-combatants, child soldiers. And then, do you want to talk about private sector?
Yeah, sure. So we talked about how can we kind of leverage the private sector within this space, specifically looking at like workforce development, employability, but also entrepreneurship. And then that also led to a discussion about the ICT technology space, and we had some. He left the room, but he shared a really good example of technology and using that to build skills development for youth. And at least speaking from my organization, we're not currently doing anything in that space, but that's definitely something we want to prioritize and figure out how can we intersect those two.
Another topic that we talk about is after conflict in different regions, and I speak about Mexico. It's gender-based about violence after the narco war, and there's a lot of girls that grew up with that, and just to give them the awareness of the new opportunities would be amazing.
Yeah, so I think those were kind of the top ones. Some of the other ones got lower votes. We'll definitely pull together a list of all the topics and share that with everybody.
I think one thing more to note, because I just read on there the comment about this being a very global group. Another thing that we mentioned was comparative learning across regions. And I'm not sure if maybe there could be like a webinar focused on that, but I feel like that goes back to how can we build like evidence-based approaches that are specific to different regions and contexts, but also learn from one another for that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That comparative learning, and Kyle mentioned some, I think, a good example of where he has experience with that. So I think, and we have some YouthPower projects that are also using that intergenerational learning in Latin America. So I think that could be an interesting topic. So what we'll do is we will pull together these lists and send it out to our full community of practice and get their voices too in terms of the vote. But we also collected, at least in our group, some that where we know that some of our members here can contribute. So I'm not sure if you got to talk about that in your group. So if we want to collect that, I don't know if you have that somewhere on the chart.
Our first topic, the PYD and resilience. Youth resilience is something that FHI 360 is doing research on, and we can contribute. And also the comparative learning across regions. We did under the CoP project a research with Mercy Corps on gang violence prevention and what lessons can be learned and applied to CVE and MENA. So that's just another research that's been done that could be contributed.
We had a group online who
And was there somebody in particular that had a tool or something that they can present on? All right, we'll find it in the.
Not sure if that
chat.
person can speak up in the
Later.
chat, but we have a very vibrant and lively
All
chat
right.
box.
I want to leave enough time for Kyle's presentation. So what we'll do is we'll send it out to the group, and then if you have any other suggestions of speakers on different topics, and we'll send it out also as a poll so that everybody can just vote, so that we have the full community vote on what we should prioritize. And part of it is, we'll do a mix of, these are topics that we know members have actually something that they can share, and these are topics that everybody's really interested in, even though we may not have somebody in our group that can share something, and then we'll just try and find some speakers on those topics. Does that work for everybody?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. This is really, really interesting, and I think some good thinking in terms of the topics. And we'll try to merge them a little bit, group them together so that we get a kind of a clean list of topics. With that, we'll jump to the last item on the program for today, which is the White Dove Radio Project. And Kyle is our your LinkedIn picture.
Okay, yeah.
For our online group, because they don't see you. So as I mentioned, Kyle is one of our Coaxis is one of our 4 grantees, and has a really interesting project in Nigeria. Since when we started to plan this session, we weren't yet sure if he would be allowed to say anything about it or not. We also asked him to talk about a radio project that they have in Nigeria, which is a little bit connected actually with our program. And so, he'll talk about both of these activities.
Great. Which mic? This one? Okay, awesome. Well, howdy, everybody. Okay, so yeah, I want to do 2 things. I mean, radio projects are one thing. What we're doing here with the research, they're all linked. Just quickly about my background and where I work. I work for an organization called Equal Access. I am, my focus is really youth development, peace building. In the past 10 years, a lot